Bienvenidos a esta presentación del subjuntivo. This is part one of the subjunctive videos. This video will begin to show how to use and when to use a subjunctive mood in Spanish. So far in your Spanish studies, you've been using verbs in the indicative mood. The indicative mood is used to talk about things that actually happened, are happening, or will happen. Examples of the indicative mood are the present tense, the preterite, the imperfect, and the future. There's another way of speaking in Spanish, and that is the subjunctive mood. The subjunctive mood expresses things that haven't happened, that might happen. It expresses doubt or uncertainty, and it expresses wants or requests or demands. So if we break down a sentence that has a subjunctive in it, we have three parts. The first part is the independent clause. The independent clause can stand on its own. It is independent. That is to say, it has a subject and a verb. Ella quiere means that she wants. We could put a period after this, and it would be a sentence that can stand on its own, grammatically speaking. The verb, quiere, in this case, is trying to suggest that somebody else do something. The verb of the independent clause is always going to be a verb of recommendation, of a suggestion, a prohibition, a want, a request, and we'll see other triggers for the subjunctive in a little bit. In a subjunctive sentence, you're always going to have the word que. Que separates the independent clause from the dependent clause and connects the two. What que connects is the dependent clause. It cannot stand on its own. That I learn French is a sentence that cannot stand by itself. Notice, aprender is an ER verb, but aprenda ends in an A. That is a subjunctive, and we learned how to conjugate the subjunctive a few days ago. The subjunctive verb is what should happen, or what's being recommended that happen, or what's being prohibited. Another way to look at a subjunctive sentence is by using a tow truck as the independent clause. It can run on its own. The hitch that connects the car that isn't running is the que. And finally, the car that is inoperable, that isn't working, is a dependent clause. It cannot stand on its own, or go anywhere rather, without the independent clause. So in these examples, we have somebody suggesting or wanting other people to do things. I want you to breathe slowly. The coach demands that the athlete stretch. I suggest that they drink water before running. All of these have an independent clause of someone wanting to influence somebody else in the dependent clause. Quiero que tú respires lentamente. Respiras ends in ES because the subjunctive is required. The coach demands that the athlete stretch. This is demanding something. This requires a subjunctive. Notice estiren from the verb estirar. And I suggest that they drink water is a suggestion. I don't know if they'll do it, but I want them to. Beban from the verb beber. So what's in the independent clause to influence? Well, some teachers use the trick of weirdo to remember things. If somebody in the independent clause wishes or wants something, if there's emotion in the independent clause, if there's an impersonal expression, if there's a request, or if there's doubt or denial, these all require the subjunctive in the dependent clause. And there's a phrase in Spanish, ojalá que, which means I wish that, or God willing. This is also going to fall in the wishes, wants, requests categories. And another way to look at this is by memorizing all of the subjunctive triggers. This is not the entire list of subjunctive triggers in the Spanish language, but it is a lot of them. The first column are all verbs of influence, where one person is trying to influence the second. In this column, you have to have two different subjects in order to have the subjunctive. The second column, verbs of doubt. If doubt is expressed, the subjunctive is not, if doubt is expressed in the independent clause, we need to have the subjunctive in the dependent clause. The third column are impersonal expressions. The first one, for example, es necesario que. It's necessary that. If something is necessary that means that it's not happening and it needs a subjunctive after the que. And finally, verbs of emotion. Verbs of emotion in the independent clause are going to need the subjunctive in the dependent clause. Gracias por ver este video y te deseo mucho éxito.